So, hey everyone. Well, today I'm going to talk about my furry origin story, which I know we all have one, and mine begins with an artist by the name of Susan Van Camp. Now, she used to operate a card game that she called Dragonstorm, which had to do with cat furries and shapeshifters and dragons and a bunch of other things. And I had originally come across her at a local sci-fi convention. You know, she was in the dealer's room and she had a table, and of course, I should preface this by saying that like most furries, I grew up with things like Care Bears, like My Little Pony, gargoyles, Disney movies, all the sort of things that you had in the 80s. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Like, is there anybody that didn't watch Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles in the 80s? It was kind of like everywhere. But and of course, I had an interest in animal characters, in transformation, and for a long time it was kind of one of those things that I never really knew that there was a word for it, that it was something that other people really had an interest in besides myself. I'd always be watching these cartoons and just end up being drawn to the furry stuff in particular. It's like Care Bears, in particular. It's like I always had a thing for Grumpy Bear. I didn't really watch My Little Pony quite as much when I was younger. My sister watched it, and of course I watched it because she watched it. And in part, it was also because the earlier version wasn't nearly as good as Friendship is Magic. But in hindsight, watching it, I do have some nostalgia of some of the old My Little Pony. And of course, the Teenage Ninja Turtles has a little bit of that campiness that is just so ridiculous that they point out in later versions. But at the time, it was kind of the style, and it had a lot of cases, a lot of shows where they had animal characters and so on and so forth. And this built up this initial interest in me for these sorts of things. And unrelated to most of this, I remember at least at one point, I think my mom had made me like a homemade mouse costume, and I don't have a picture of it, or if I do, I don't know where I could find it in digital form. But I remember it was pretty basic, but it was still pretty cool, especially because back in those days, pretty much if you really weren't ways to buy stuff like that. It was pretty much whatever you could make, and it was pretty good for for a costume for a young child. But and I really liked it. It was a good look. I think I remember it being pretty good. Um, but I was like most people. I watched the cartoons and had the interest in all this sort of thing, and finally I had started playing in a Star Trek related RPG back when people used to do RPGs in chat rooms, and maybe they still do. But this was like an early period where everybody would log on to the chat at the same time and you would all tell a story together. And this was like a Star Trek RPG. And I played a cat character, which of course at the time I didn't know was furry. But it just made sense, I guess. And from what I remember, it wasn't really that deep, and I think at the time it was kind of, I wasn't really a great DM. I didn't really know what I was doing. I mean, I wasn't, we kind of rotated, but whenever it was my turn, I was just like, I don't really know what I'm doing, so I just kind of, but I guess that's how everybody is when they start. Um, but anyway, I had this character that was Anthro which of course, again, I didn't know that's what it was at the time. So, my friend that also went to these sci-fi conventions, she knew about the character I played because we were in the same crew, same RPG, same sci-fi Star Trek RPG crew, and so we went to Icon, which I went to every year pretty much, or at least initially I had to get my parents to take me, and then subsequent years I was able to drive myself. But one of these years, my friend had come across this table that was selling furry prints. And of course, she knew who my character was from this RPG that we had been playing. So she came over and told me, it's like, you have to see what this woman is selling. So I went over to the table and I saw some really beautiful traditional art of Anthrocat furries for her RPG Dragonstorm. And that was how I met Susan Van Camp. And it's really not an exaggeration to say that this moment, that this woman, that she really altered the course of my life in a good way, or at least I think it's a good way, because this was how I found furry. This was how I kind of got an interest in a lot of the things that I have interest in now, and I really want to get in touch with her and just thank her and provide her support and whatever social interaction that I can, because I've unfortunately lost touch with her and I haven't been able to reach her for several years. But anyway, I'll come back to that. When we first met, she had a couple of prints that I really liked, so I bought a couple and I took them home with me. And on the back, there was this word anthropomorphic. And I didn't know what it meant at the time. So I ran a Google search. And of course, as they say, the rest is history. It was like the anthropomorphic art of Susan Van Camp or something. And this had led me to websites that at the time were like the nexus of the furry universe, particularly Yerf and Furnation. Any of you who've been around long enough kind of know that those were sort of the early websites that everybody was visiting. Yerf was an art gallery where people would post their work, and Furnation was kind of, I think, a nexus for websites. Furry websites would kind of all have, I guess, a link here that would link to their own websites. And I guess it was kind of in the era before like search engines were really good at what they do. So, you would have these hubs. You would go to this website that would kind of link to all these other websites that had the same topic. And, that was Yerf and Furnation. And that was kind of how I got my start, saving things and seeing what was out there, going to the conventions. And it was a lot of the early conventions. I went to my first convention in the year 2000, and it was Anthrocon in I think it was still in Philadelphia at the time, and it was originally at the Adams Mark. That probably definitely dates me, showing me how long I've been in the fandom. But Adams Mark was the first furry convention I'd ever gone to, and it was fun. I mean, conventions have changed a lot in the last 20 years, but when I first started going, it's mind-boggling how different, how small it was compared to how it is now. It's like in my first fursuit parade, we had 100 fursuiters, and that was it. That was the whole max of it. And there was like 1,000 people at the con. That was a big con in those days. And I for my first convention, I did have a fursuit. It was technically a partial, and it was also just not really a plan, because of course, particularly in those days, I was in college area, high school, college, so I didn't have a lot of money, and also I didn't really have a plan. And again, back in this time period, there wasn't the breadth of fursuit makers that there are now. It's like nowadays you have so many different makers with different styles, options, techniques, price ranges. You can really go nuts if you're interested. But back in those days, the options were somewhat limited. And one of the things that I did early on was I bought a pre-made head and some paws that went with it, and I think a tail. And it was, I named it Darren, and I did develop a character around it, a character that I technically don't really use anymore. But this was what it looked like, and it was, I mean, again, for the time period, it was remarkably good. It kind of had like this visor and this hood that just covered the back, so I mean, it wasn't I guess super sharp compared to later ones, but it was Scribble Fox, and it was really detailed for the time, so I was quite pleased. But the only downside to this particular head, I recall, was that it would fog up very quickly, because those of you probably, I don't think it happens in modern suits anymore, because I don't think anybody uses lenses. I think everybody uses like fake eyes, and you see through the tear ducts and stuff. But those of you that have been in furry for a long time might remember that some folks used to have lenses for the eyes. And of course, if you do, when you breathe out, you create steam or moisture, which causes the eyes to fog. So after about 20 minutes, you can't see anything. And and this was definitely the case with this head. So it was kind of like periods where you would have to, take the head off and just kind of let it defog, and then go for another 20 minutes or something. But in the character for Darren was designed to fit the suit because I had it pre-made, so it wasn't like I could specify, design this character from scratch. And I'd had him worked around a story, and it just wasn't one that survived the test of time for me. But it was my first fursuit, my first convention, and it was all kind of like, I guess, an interesting first experience because that was how I ended up starting my path in the furry fandom. And a couple, I guess, maybe a year or two afterwards, I had designed my first intentionally created character, a tiger named Kathris Reinhardt, which, although a couple of details have changed, he's one of the characters, one of the oldest characters that I created that is still in active use. And I say active in that he's intended to be a part of a story that I'm currently working on rebooting along with some of the others. I'm trying to determine definitive versions of all of these stories just so that I can finish them and get them told and such. And part of it was just that for a long time I shifted the goalposts as I was working on them because um, with Kathris, he's a tiger with a blonde ponytail and dark black hair. And originally, I was planning on making my hair look like his, but I ultimately never ended up doing it because I never had the guts to dye my hair at the time. I mean, it wouldn't have taken much; it just would have had to have been bleached, I guess. But I, I never had the guts to do it when my hair was long because in those days my hair would go long to a ponytail, and then I would get tired of it and cut it off, and then I would let it grow back, and it would go back and forth for a while, kind of back and forth like a pendulum. And ultimately, I just decided to, of course, then when I decided to transition, I decided to leave my hair long. But that's skipping ahead a little bit. And with Kathris, there aren't a lot of details I'd say that still stick. He's supposed to be a skilled fighter. I remember that much, and that he's supposed to be, um, I guess, talented at using different weapons. And a lot of it'll probably get tweaked as I kind of continue to work on this story going forward because there's a lot of elements that seem to make sense at the time that I'm kind of thinking now that I have the opportunity I might retool a lot of them. But Kathris was my first consciously created character, and for a long time I'd contemplated getting a suit of him. I never did, but it was one of those characters that's still around, that's still used. Like this is what he looks like, and he's still in active use today. And I definitely, it's one of those designs that I just always liked. And although his outfit and his clothes will probably change or have changed since then, he was the first time I intentionally created a furry character from scratch, or at least I think so. Most of the ones I'd had up to that point had been borrowed or otherwise utilized from somewhere else. I guess I've skipped over it a little bit, but I was kind of looking to talk mostly about my own characters. But I would be remiss if I didn't at least mention Hallie, which was by Lackadaisy's creator Tracy Butler. It was originally, I think, her character that I had a fursuit of that she allowed me to have made, and that I had for several years. This is a picture of that, and I must thank you again, Tracy, for that permission because I mean, I don't know, maybe in the modern day it would be kind of weird for somebody else to have a suit of your persona, but I always thought I treated it with respect, and that I was trying to, I was pretty good with, or tried to be uh having fun with it. But maybe, and it's something I probably wouldn't do nowadays, but at the time it seemed like it made sense. I guess it was just, I don't know, why I didn't develop my original characters earlier. But Then there was also, of course, Zigzag, which was created by Max Black Rabbit, and that's the suit here. And for Zigzag, for a couple of years, I guess for like 3 or 4 years, I was the reigning Zigzag. For a while, the suit was made by Scribblefox. When Scribblefox became available, I thought which character would be best utilized under his talents. So I asked him to make me a Zigzag suit. And with Max Black Rabbit's permission, I had the suit made. And this is a little footage of the first time he saw the suit, which, I mean, I'm sure that if you've seen my channel, you've probably seen it. I think it's one of my most viewed videos, and it's one of the earliest memories in Furry, because it wasn't long after I'd gotten into it. It was like maybe a year or two after I'd gotten into the fandom that this happened, 2002 or 3 maybe, or something, and it wasn't long at all. Um, but although Zigzag served me well, she gave me a lot of confidence and kind of also, I guess, caused a couple of mistakes that I later came to realize. But it's I guess a learning process and such. But I mean, Zigzag was gave me a lot of confidence, taught me a lot of things, and she also kind of introduced me to the fact that I like stripes. White stripes, black stripes, white fur, and I'd always liked horses. It's always been, I guess, an interest of mine, but I guess it was never super strong. Sometimes stuff that's right in front of me I don't see for a long time. It's like, I always have had a teddy bear, but I never had a bear character until relatively recently. And then it was, this realization while I was portraying Zigzag that I like stripes, I like equines, and, surely there's got to be some animal that combines these two elements somehow. Well, for some reason, this never occurred to me until about 2006. And this was when I was in the fandom for like 7 years. Some people find their personas early. Me, it took a while, a long time, at least 6 years. And Lauren was originally inspired by a Max Black Rabbit pic, which I don't have, or at least I do, but it's buried in the folders, and I can't find it. I haven't been able to find it every time I've looked. But it's this picture of a zebra in front of a waterfall, kind of looking over her shoulder. She's naked. She's just looking over. And it was just like, it caught my attention. And I was just like, okay, I like this. And so, at the time, and even currently, zebras are exceedingly rare. It's like, I think the number of zebras that I know in the fandom, I could probably count on my fingers, maybe even one hand. I don't know. There were a couple more, but I know that one has passed, unfortunately, through health issues. Um, but I with this picture, it's like at the time, I think it was the early 2000s, and I had just seen the 5th season of Angel, and I was riding high on Joss Whedon's series, and I saw the character of Illyria, and Illyria had the blue hair, and I really just liked the look for some reason. And so what I did was I had this zebra and I had the blue hair, and I kind of combined them, and I added some character elements that later went away because the story changed. But and I created this background character named Lauren, and of course this originally was supposed to be one of those characters that was just going to be in the background. She wasn't supposed to be a main character, and she definitely wasn't intended to be my persona. But the more that I used her, the more quickly she became a center stage character, and then in time just took over as my official representation. So, in 2006 or 7, I commissioned a fursuit from Mixed Candy. And, of course, this was the original version of the fursuit. And, Lauren was kind of like my flagship character pretty much from that point on, and that has never changed. And it was obviously the inspiration for when I changed my legal name when I transitioned, because Lauren is me, and I am her, and all that kind of sort of stuff. So when I it's one of the easiest things about transitioning, knowing what I was going to be called, because it was just like, Lauren was my character, Lauren was who I wanted to be, so it was that, name that I wanted to go by. Because also, I've been going by Lauren in furry circles for quite some time before that, before I ever transitioned, so, it was a natural progression. And although the character right now is going through a little bit of a tweak, while the entire universe, I guess, is kind of like reset from zero, and then coming up with a solid, coherent plan from there. But a couple of things aren't going to change. It's like she's always going to be named Lauren Rivers. She's always going to have the water powers, and that part is still solid. But the rest is still kind of being worked on. But I would like to say that that Lauren definitely was, I guess, when I really found my position in furry, or at least who was going to be leading me forward through this journey. And I mean, that, I guess, is how I got to the furry, I guess, that the furry that exists before you. Lauren was definitely kind of like the last piece of the puzzle as far as an origin story, because once I had settled on her, like, there was never any desire after that to change my persona. It's like I have other characters, of course, but never any desire to have anything else other than the zebra as my representation. And that's pretty much how I ended up where I am in furry. So this is my furry origin story, and I'd be interested to hear yours in the comments below. So feel free to share and let me know how you ended up in the fandom. And if you're not, what did you think of the story? Catch everyone later. If you like werewolves, check out my book Blue Moon, available in paperback and ebook on Amazon. Thanks for watching, and if you liked it, click the subscribe button and leave a comment below. You can also find me on Twitter and a few other places on the web, or support me via Patreon or Ko-fi. Zebra hugs!